of Wednesday's fatal bridge collapse over the Mississippi River in Minneapolis, the condition of the nation's highway system is coming under increased scrutiny. In 1990, the U.S. government rated the Minneapolis bridge as structurally deficient and possibly in need of replacement. That rating was contained in the Department of Transportation's National Bridge Inventory database. More than 70,000 bridges across the country have also been rated structurally deficient. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates it would take nearly $190 billion to fix these bridges over the next 2 decades. In Minnesota, many residents have begun questioning the spending priorities of the state and the nation. Nick Coleman of the Star Tribune wrote a column yesterday entitled, "Public Anger Will Follow Our Sorrow." He points out the motto of Governor Tim Pawlenty has been no new taxes. Last spring, Pawlenty vetoed a 5-cent gas tax increase, the first in 20 years, that would have produced millions of dollars in revenue to help fix roads. Nick Coleman wrote, quote, "At the federal level, the parsimony is worse, and so is the negligence. $1 trillion spent in Iraq while schools crumble. There aren't enough cops on the street, and bridges decay while our leaders cross their fingers and ignore the rising chances of disaster." On the national level, the Highway Trust Fund is about to go broke. When President Bush took office, the fund had a $23 billion surplus, but it's expected to be running a deficit by next year, in part because Bush killed an increase in gas taxes 2 years ago. The columnist Jim Hightower recently accused the government of deliberately defunding these vital infrastructure projects in an effort to open the door to privatization. Investment firms including Goldman Sachs, the Carlyle Group, Merrill Lynch, and Morgan Stanley are forming large funds to purchase publicly owned infrastructure projects. And the privatization of the nation's roads has already begun. In Indiana, Governor Mitch Daniels has leased the 157-mile Indiana toll road to a foreign consortium from Spain and Australia for $3.85 billion over the next 75 years. But one calculation the toll road will generate, $11 billion over the life of the lease. Indiana's Governor Mitch Daniels has been nicknamed Mr. Privatized by some for his willingness to sell off public assets. Before coming to Indiana, Daniels served as the president's White House budget director. And Indiana's not alone. In Illinois, officials signed a 99-year, $1.8 billion lease to hand over the Chicago Skyway. To talk more about the privatization of the nation's highways, we're joined by 2 reporters from Mother Jones magazine, James Ridgway and Daniel Schulman. Earlier this year, they co-wrote an article entitled "The Highwaymen: Why You Could Soon Be Paying Wall Street Investors, Australian Bankers, and Spanish Builders for the Privilege of Driving on American Roads." We welcome you both to Democracy Now!, and I want to begin with Daniel Schulman. Why don't you start off by giving us the background on the privatization or the building of U.S. highways? You talk about President Eisenhower.
Right. Well, he signed into law the Federal Aid Highway Act in 1956, which really brought the federal interstate highway system that we know now. And it was supposed to be free, and it was supposed to be accessible to everyone, and it was supposed to interconnect the communities in this country. It was really one of the major initiatives of his administration.
And so what happened from there?
Well, over time, there hasn't been very much commitment at the federal or state level to funding infrastructure projects. As you see in Minnesota, people are very afraid to raise the gas tax. They're afraid that this is going to impact, I'm talking about elected officials, this is going to impact their re-election chances. So over time, it's just become a lot easier for them to look to get a big upfront payment. They can use that in the interim to pay down debt, or in the case of Indiana, to put towards other infrastructure projects. And down the road, you know, people are going to have to bear the cost of that because this asset is not going to be under their control anymore.
Jim Ridgway, the piece is called "The Highwaymen: Why You Soon Will Be Paying Wall Street Investors, Australian Bankers, and Spanish Builders for the Privilege of Driving on American Roads." Explain who the players are right now. Who's taking over U.S. highways?
Well, it's all in process. I mean, the thing is that the major Wall Street investment companies are trying to link up with various international partners in Australia and Spain and elsewhere to essentially buy this sort of decaying or infrastructure that is in need of repair. And this is, it's appealing, as Dan, I think, mentioned, it's appealing to the local politicians because it looks like they're getting some cash from these guys in Wall Street, and they're not going to have to raise taxes to fix the roads. And there's the illusion that sooner or later these roads will get fixed. Now, whether that happens or not is like anybody's guess. Because when this actually takes place, when the actual improvement of the roads is done, is going to be when all these politicians are dead and gone.
Daniel Schulman, in the piece, you write, 50 years to the day after Ike put his pen to the Highway Act, another Republican signed off on another historic highway project. On June 29, 2006, Mitch Daniels, former Bush administration official turned governor of Indiana, was greeted with a round of applause as he stepped into a conference room packed with reporters and state lawmakers. The last of 8 wire transfers had landed in the state's account, making it official. Indiana had received $3.8 billion from a foreign consortium made up of a Spanish construction firm, Sintra, the Macquarie Infrastructure Group of Australia. In exchange, the state would hand over the operation of the 157-mile Indiana toll road for the next 75 years. And it goes on from there. Talk about the political climate. How did people in Indiana, how did Hoosiers feel about this?
People were absolutely, I went to Indiana shortly after that, and people were absolutely outraged. If you travel that toll road, even now, I think, and talk to people, they still don't understand why this road that really is part of their, cultural, it's just like the rest of the roads in this country, we really feel a deep affinity for them, why this is in the hands of a foreign consortium. And some of it is xenophobia, some of it they don't want foreigners running their roads, but some of it is also they've got, they've asked really hard questions about this. Are we getting a good deal? And frankly, a lot of people are saying no. You cited the figure before that some say that Indiana, over the life of this contract, the road could have generated $11 billion. So that's a $7 billion net loss for the taxpayers of Indiana. No, people in Indiana are outraged, and elsewhere too. You've seen in New Jersey recently, there was a backlash against the potential plan to privatize the New Jersey Turnpike, which some said could bring in as much as $20 billion. I was driving that road recently, and there was a big sign, a big billboard, against this privatization plan, and the plan has been pulled at this point.
You're right. In fact, Daniels argued in a paper he wrote for the Reason Foundation last spring, any business person will recognize our decision here as the freeing of trapped value from an underperforming asset to be redeployed into a better use with higher returns. Daniel.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the euphemisms that they're using right now, but there are other ways to do this. If a state wanted to, if the state needed to generate more money, they could try to refinance the road. And they could get their $3.8 billion, put it into infrastructure, and still keep control of the road. So yes, you'll hear Daniels and you'll hear the investment bankers say it. I just don't know if it's completely true.